People often think that freedom means doing whatever you want. They think it means the absence of constraint, that if only they could get rid of all their responsibilities, then they'd finally be free. But that's not freedom, that's chaos, and chaos doesn't liberate you, it consumes you. What people don't realize is that life is built on sacrifice. Always, you don't get to avoid it. You only get to choose what you're going to sacrifice and for what purpose. That's the truth most people don't want to face. You either sacrifice what's easy now, or you sacrifice what's meaningful later. But either way, something's going to burn. And see, that's the profound thing about being human. We're conscious. We can look ahead. We can recognize that every choice has a cost, and that cost is paid in time, in energy, in suffering. But if you choose wisely what you're willing to sacrifice for, you can turn that suffering into something redemptive. You can transform it into meaning. Think about it. If you decide you're not going to take responsibility, fine. Then you'll sacrifice your potential. You'll sacrifice your self-respect. You'll sacrifice the stability of your relationships, your health, your soul. You can do that. People do it all the time. They choose comfort over growth, distraction over discipline, pleasure over purpose. But that's a terrible trade. It's a short-term game with long-term devastation. Or you can make the opposite choice. You can decide that you're willing to give up something now, the immediate gratification, the easy path, in order to become something greater later. You can sacrifice the chaos of the present for the order of a meaningful future. And that's not naïve, it's heroic. Because when you voluntarily take on sacrifice, you're saying, I see the cost and I accept it. You're aligning yourself with something higher than mere comfort, something noble, something that gives you direction. Every great story, every myth, every act of heroism, they all revolve around this principle. The hero leaves the comfort of home, faces the unknown, and sacrifices safety, certainty, sometimes even life itself, for something that transcends them. And through that act, they become transformed. That's what you have to do. You have to decide what's worth the pain, because you can't have a meaningful life without pain. You can only choose which pain is worth it. Will you endure the pain of discipline, or the pain of regret, the pain of growth, or the pain of decay? You get to pick your sacrifice. So look at your life honestly. Ask yourself, what am I sacrificing for? Is it worth it? Is it noble? Does it make me stronger, or does it make me smaller? Because if you don't consciously choose your sacrifice, life will choose it for you, and you won't like the terms. The great paradox is this: the more you sacrifice for something meaningful, the freer you become. Responsibility isn't a prison, it's the path out of chaos. When you shoulder the burden willingly, you become the kind of person who can carry it, and that changes everything. So don't run from sacrifice, don't hide from it. Stand up straight with your shoulders back and choose your sacrifice carefully, because in that choice lies the difference between you can't avoid sacrifice. You only get to choose what to sacrifice for. That's one of the most fundamental truths about existence. And it's something people have understood for thousands of years, even if they didn't use the same language to describe it. Every choice you make is also a choice to give something up. Every path you walk means abandoning all the others. There's no escaping that. To live at all is to forego infinite possibilities for the sake of one. And that's what sacrifice really means. It's not just a religious concept, it's the structure of reality itself. When you decide to pursue anything of value, you're making a trade. You're sacrificing your time, your energy, your comfort, your leisure, your security, and you're doing it for the hope of something better. But the key is that this sacrifice must be chosen consciously. If you refuse to make sacrifices voluntarily, life will make them for you, and that's a much worse deal. You'll pay the price in failure, in aimlessness, in bitterness. Because when you refuse to decide what you're willing to give up, you end up giving up everything that matters without even realizing it. Think about it in practical terms. If you decide not to study, you sacrifice competence. If you decide not to work, you sacrifice independence. If you decide not to tell the truth, you sacrifice your integrity. You might think you're avoiding pain in the short term, but what you're actually doing is deferring it. And when it comes back, it's heavier, harder, and more punishing. The refusal to sacrifice voluntarily always leads to a forced sacrifice later on. Human beings are unique because we can understand this process. We can imagine the future. We can see the long-term consequences of our actions. And that means we have the remarkable capacity to negotiate with reality. We can say, I'm willing to suffer now in this particular way so that I don't have to suffer later in a worse way. That's what maturity looks like. That's what it means to be responsible, to voluntarily take on the burden of sacrifice instead of waiting for life to crush you with it. It's also why the most meaningful lives are built around intentional sacrifice. People who commit to something greater than themselves, raising a family, mastering a craft, serving a cause, understand that every gain comes with a cost. But they've chosen that cost. They've aligned their sacrifices with something meaningful enough to justify the struggle. And that's the only way you can endure it without becoming resentful. Because the moment you see the point of your suffering, it stops being meaningless. It becomes part of a story, part of a journey towards something transcendent. The danger today is that so many people think they can bypass this principle. They think that with enough convenience, comfort, or technology, they can escape sacrifice altogether. But what they end up with is a shallow existence. Pleasure without purpose, freedom without direction, abundance without gratitude. Because even when you think you're avoiding sacrifice, you're not. You're still paying a price, only now it's invisible and corrosive. You're sacrificing depth, discipline, and meaning. So the real question isn't whether you'll sacrifice, it's whether you'll do it willingly and wisely. You can live aimlessly, drifting wherever life pushes you, sacrificing your potential for ease. Or you can live intentionally, choosing your sacrifices based on what's truly worth the pain. There's no middle ground, because reality demands a cost from everyone. The only power you have is to decide what you'll pay it for, and what kind of person you'll become in the process is spare and purpose. Between mediocrity and greatness, between a wasted life and a meaningful one, choosing comfort now means sacrificing your potential later. That's the cruel but undeniable trade, oft embedded in life. Every time you take the easy path, you're giving up something far more valuable, the chance to grow, to strengthen, to become capable of more than you currently are. Comfort feels safe, but it's deceptive. It disguises itself as peace, when in truth, it's often stagnation in disguise. Growth, by definition, requires discomfort. It demands that you confront what you don't yet know and what you can't yet do. When you choose comfort, you're protecting yourself from temporary pain, but condemning yourself to long-term mediocrity. You stay where you are because it feels familiar, but staying still in a moving world means falling behind. The person who avoids challenge might feel content in the moment, but the cost accumulates quietly in missed opportunities, unrealized potential, and the slow erosion of confidence. You start to lose faith in your own ability to act, to strive, to endure. Potential doesn't reveal itself in ease. It's forged in the act of overcoming, in facing chaos and bringing order to it. The person who chooses discipline over comfort, effort over ease, discovers capacities they didn't even know they had. They become someone who can be relied upon by others and by themselves. The person who always seeks comfort never finds out what they could have been, because they never put themselves in the conditions necessary for transformation. Every moment of comfort now is borrowed from your future. The more you indulge it, the less you have to draw upon later. Comfort offers the illusion of freedom, but secretly demands your potential as payment. That's the bargain most people make without realizing it, and it's the reason so many live lives far smaller than they could have been. Voluntary sacrifice transforms suffering into meaning. That's one of the deepest insights of human existence, and it's at the heart of every great moral and spiritual tradition. When you willingly choose to endure difficulty for the sake of something greater, you change the nature of that suffering. It's no longer pure chaos. It becomes structured. It gains a purpose. And that purpose is what keeps you from being destroyed by it. Suffering is inevitable. There's no escaping it. But meaningless suffering is unbearable. That's the kind that crushes people, that drives them into bitterness or despair. The difference between suffering that destroys and suffering that strengthens is the presence of voluntary acceptance. When you say, I will take this burden on willingly, you shift from being a victim of life to being a participant in its process. You stop asking, why me? And start asking. Voluntary sacrifice is the act of aligning yourself with that question. You decide that your pain will not be wasted. You'll use it as fuel to build, to serve, to grow. That's why people who suffer for love, for truth, for family, or for their ideals often emerge wiser and more resilient. They've taken their suffering and given it a reason to exist. This is the essence of responsibility. Choosing to bear something difficult because it's right to do so, not because it's easy. It's the recognition that life's hardships can either corrupt you or refine you, depending on how you approach them. By accepting sacrifice voluntarily, you turn chaos into order, despair into discipline, and pain into purpose. What was once meaningless becomes the very thing that gives your existence depth and direction. Responsibility is not a burden, it's the path to freedom. That sounds paradoxical because people often equate freedom with the absence of constraint, as if being free means doing whatever you want whenever you want. But that's not freedom. That's chaos disguised as liberty. True freedom comes when you take ownership of your life, when you accept the weight of responsibility and carry it willingly. Only then do you gain the stability and direction that make freedom meaningful. Responsibility organizes your life. It gives shape to your actions and boundaries to your choices. Without it, everything dissolves into confusion. You become reactive instead of proactive, tossed around by every impulse and circumstance. When you refuse responsibility, you hand over control to the chaos of the world, and that's when you truly become enslaved, not by others, but by your own avoidance. Taking responsibility means recognizing that your actions matter, that what you do or fail to do has real consequences. It means understanding that meaning doesn't come from chasing pleasure, but from building something solid and enduring. The weight of responsibility is what anchors you to reality and gives your efforts coherence. The more of it you can bear, the more capable and free you become, because you're no longer dependent on others to fix your life or define your purpose. Every meaningful pursuit, relationships, work, creativity, moral growth demands responsibility. You can't love someone without it, you can't lead without it, and you can't become strong without it. When you choose to shoulder that weight voluntarily, you discover that what once felt like confinement is actually liberation. You find that by taking responsibility for your existence, you gain the power to shape it, to direct it towards something that justifies the struggle. The quality of your life depends on the worthiness of your chosen sacrifice. Everything you value requires the loss of something else, and the measure of your character is determined by what you're willing to give up for the sake of what you believe matters most. If you aim low, you'll sacrifice for trivial things, comfort, approval, entertainment, and your life will reflect the smallness of those pursuits. But if you aim high, if you choose to sacrifice for something noble, something that stretches you beyond yourself, then your life becomes proportionally meaningful. You can think of sacrifice as an investment of your suffering. You're going to suffer anyway, so the only real question is whether your suffering will amount to anything. Sacrifice without purpose leads to resentment, but sacrifice directed toward a worthy goal becomes the foundation of meaning. It's the principle that separates the trivial from the transcendent. The greater the value of what you're aiming at, the more justifiable your sacrifices become, and the more capable you are of enduring them. This is why people who dedicate their lives to something beyond their own self-interest often radiate a sense of depth and peace. Their sacrifices are not wasted because they've been offered to something that calls them upward. In contrast, those who live only for themselves end up fragmented and hollow because their sacrifices serve nothing enduring. Choosing a worthy sacrifice demands honesty. You have to ask what's truly valuable, not just what feels good in the moment. It requires courage to aim high because it means confronting the cost. But the quality of your existence is directly linked to the height of your aim and the depth of your commitment to it. What you sacrifice for determines what you become,